President Bola Tinubu has commended the National Assembly for its decision and patriotic ratification of the state of emergency proclamation in Rivers State, a critical step to restoring stability in the state. He specifically commended the National Assembly's leadership, President of the Senate Godswill Akpabio, House of Representatives Speaker Tajuddin Abbas, other principal officers and members for prioritizing the security and welfare of Rivers State above partisan interests and other considerations. Earlier today, the special advisor to the president on media and public communications, Sunday Dare, was on TVC News and has spoken what the sole administrator is expected to do in Rivers.
Well, it's very clear. You know, I just watched, even in the president's statement, that statement, the broadcast by the president was really clear. First, he anchored his decision on the Supreme Court judgment. He also anchored his decision for the proclamation on Section 305 and other provisions therefrom. And we've had condition precedent. We've had declarations of state of emergencies before, under President Olusegun Obasanjo, former, under President Jonathan, former. And we've seen what happened. And once you're a sole administrator, you know, there are clear lines. First, the President Tinubu was clear. You are not to make any laws, but work on regulations and guidelines, but also ensure that judiciary functions properly. So the sole administrator is clear on what he needs to do.
Let's bring in Chibuzo Okereke, who's a legislative governance expert and policy analyst, for more on this development. Mr. Okereke, thanks for joining us on the news this hour. You'll notice a sharp mix of opinions and ideas followed Mr. President's decision, especially the role the National Assembly has to play. Are you surprised by what appears an overwhelming endorsement by both houses today?
Well, let me say first, I wasn't surprised, and I wasn't surprised for a number of factors. Number one is that the condition precedent for consideration of a gazetted state of emergency proclamation by the president for the National Assembly is predicated on two important documents. One is the gazetted document, and then a compendium of the background issue that led to whatever state of emergency, that have been declared. The number two issue is that the National Assembly, both chambers, by their own rules, the Senate Rule 33, 34, 35, 133, 134, 135, and all that. Then the House of Representatives, Order 16, Rule 1, 2, 3, and what have you. Those rules prescribe that they should resolve to committee of the whole because of the delicate nature of the issue of state of emergency. So the fact that certain national security issues will be discussed at that closed door section. And this is where many people were not surprised that they emerged from that particular closed door section and had overwhelming support for the declaration made by the president. But for people like us who are in the legislative governance space, we are worried about procedure. There are certainly procedural issues on what the National Assembly has done today, especially regarding the state of the matter in consideration, that is a matter of public interest, is a matter of national importance. And if you look at the House of Representatives voting provisions for rules, Rule 11.6 prescribes that for a matter of public interest, that the voting shall be by division, because it's difficult for you to gauge a voice vote, although under Order 11 Rule 2, the voting method are voice vote, voting by register when there is a division, and electronic voting. We don't have electronic voting gadget installed in National Assembly as of today. But the unfortunate thing is the procedural breach where no member was able to move for a division of the House so that vote can be taken. And in fact, Order 11 Rule 6 in the House require that when those votes are taken and recorded, that it shall be published in the at least two national dailies. So for a matter of this level of public interest, it was expected that that particular rule should apply and not Rule 11.2,
I
that
get
is
you,
just by
Mr.
voice
Okereke.
vote. Many people can argue that, oh,
Indeed.
since there was no dissenting vote, that it was 100%. But
Yes.
for us, it's a procedural challenge that we have to look at again.
I get your point clearly, but interestingly, there was no voice confirmation for nays when that decision was put to voice vote. But I wanted to speak specifically to what we understand to be the law now as regards who oversees the regulations made by the sole administrator. In Mr. President's broadcast, he made reference to the role of the Federal Executive Council, but it seems the National Assembly has a different idea, talking about both committees from both houses doing or being responsible for that role?
Well, I think speaking specifically to that, I would rather adopt the position of the Senate resolution than that of the House of Representatives. You see, sole administrator in a democracy sort of represent a dark side of democracy when we don't have this kind of situation. The National Assembly may have even failed the people of Rivers since last year when they refused to invoke Section 11.4 of the Constitution, when it became obvious that the House of Assembly of Rivers State could no longer meet. We had multiple speakers. The State Assembly House was demolished. There were a lot of litigation. They could have invoked Section 11.4. As at this moment, invoking Section 11.4 to begin to make law for a sole administrator, I don't think the Constitution envisaged a situation where elected representatives will cohabit with a sole administrator. And that is why I prefer the resolution in the Senate to the fact that a joint committee I will be able to do that. So and remember that regulations are actually made pursuant to existing laws. So there are people who argue that why would the president authorize the sole administrator to make regulations are made to amplify existing law, to give effect to existing law. So if the sole administrator transmits it to the president transmits them to the joint committee of the House and Senate, who will look at it, do committee of supply to approve appropriations and approve those regulations. In fact, both houses of the National Assembly have sufficient provision in their rule for what we call and even standing committees for delegated legislation,
Mr. Okereke,
which is what regulation falls within a subsidiary law.
We have to go now, but quickly, if you can hear me, which of these recommendations do you consider given as law? Which of them is the administrator bound by as we speak?
What the administrator should be bound by, one, is the resolution of the National Assembly. Because you see, the power to declare state of emergency does not lie within the presidency alone. When such is done, the actual power to domicile it and operationalize it is domiciled with the National Assembly. So the resolutions of the National Assembly, thankfully the votes and proceedings we approved today, will be transmitted to the president. Although what is before the National Assembly was just to ratify the proclamation. However, they went further to amend the proclamation orders to the fact that there's going to be a National Peace Committee to reconcile parties, and there's going to be a joint committee to oversight the regulatory powers of the sole administrator, and to the fact that if there is peace within period less than 6 months, that the proclamation order should be revoked by the president. So the sole administrator, though an appointee of Mr. President, but cannot effectively execute the regulatory powers without the oversight of the Joint Committee of
the National Assembly. Good place to live it. Chibuzo Okereke is legislative governance expert and policy analyst. Thank you so much for talking to us on the news this hour.
Thank you.
We'll take a break and we'll be